Okay, welcome everybody to another exciting lecture. Our topic for today is the great lost city of Cambodia, Angkor Wat. This is part of the series of the great lost cities of the world, everything from Atlantis to Machu Picchu to El Dorado and the lost city of Z somewhere in the jungle of Brazil. So this is the outline, continuity of sacred cities of the world. The world cities have a character. They endure. New York is the empire city. And even when it is down and out, it will restore its character and build the World Trade Center. And so cities continue. The birth and spread of Hinduism. Machu Picchu was built as a Hindu temple complex for the Khmer Empire. And once again, like lost cities, they decline. Sometimes they get overgrown with trees, like the lost city of Z in the jungle of Brazil, or the lost cities of the Yucatan Palenque. What causes them to decline? Well, that's part of the mystery of the lost cities. And it's rediscovery. Here again, a lot of people knew it was always there, but Europeans discovered it. Suddenly it became big news. Celebrated in the Paris World's Fair of 1878. And then a little bit about my visits to Thailand and Cambodia. The picture on the right, that's Dr. Ronald J. Brown, me standing beside one of the temples at the complex. So let's get started. Well, cities have a personality and they continue. Think of Jerusalem, the ancient city established by the Jebusites thousands of years ago. Its conquest by King David, who then made it into the capital of the Hebrew Jewish kingdom. And then it became the city of Jesus, once again reinventing itself. Then it became the sacred city of the Prophet Muhammad and Islam, then taken over by the Turks, and then taken over by everybody. Until today, it is now seized and controlled by the Jewish Zionists, who once again are making it into a Jewish holy city. Now, who knows what will be in the future? It might be taken over by aliens, or it might be taken over by the Chinese, and once again, reinvent itself. And that's the mystery, that's the charm of ancient cities. Rome, for example, the eternal city, began as the great city of the Roman Empire. Then it was taken over by the Catholic Church and became head of the Roman Catholic Church. And then Mussolini came and was going to make Rome great again and built his big monument to the Republic and the restored Roman Empire. Well, cities very often don't reinvent themselves and they fade away and disappear. Machu Picchu in Peru, totally abandoned. We don't know what happened, why it was abandoned. We don't even know if it was a sacred city, like a monastery, or whether it was the resort of the emperor of the Incas. We don't know. Tenochtitlan in Mexico, again, a completely abandoned city. When the Aztecs got there, they looked around and said, who built this monumental city with these giant pyramids and temples? Again, a lost city rediscovered. And so lost cities have captivated people from ancient times. Think of the lost city and continent of Atlantis. People are still looking for it. The lost city of Z in Brazil. The Angkor Wat is just one of these many cities. In fact, just recently, I visited the ancient lost city of Great Zimbabwe, in the African southern continent. Another lost city, abandoned, and then rediscovered. There's Great Zimbabwe in the country of Zimbabwe. We have the lost city of the cloud people, the lost city of Atlantis, Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan, the Indus Valley civilization lost city. Palenque, that's me in the middle of the Yucatan jungle, rediscovered a temple city completely covered with trees and jungle and abandoned. The mystery of the lost city, Ur of the Chaldees, the city where Abraham the prophet was from, and the city where Judaism was born as a branch of the Babylonian religions. The lost city of Z, mystery. People give their lives to rediscover it, to look for it. Films are made. The Lost City of the Kalahari Desert by Alan Paton. Roanoke, the lost colony founded by the British that disappeared. What happened to the people? That's what makes lost cities so mysterious. What happened to them? What mystery do they have? Why do people give their lives to try to search for this lost city? As we see with the lost city of Z, a tale of deadly obsession in the Amazon. Well, Angkor Wat is one of these great cities. A little bit about the history of Angkor Wat. Well, the Aryans, or the Indo-Europeans, as we can see from the picture at the bottom, emerged in what is today Russia and Ukraine. One branch, in around 2000 BC, ended up going west, and they became Germans and French and Italians and Greeks and Swedes and all these other Western European people. Many of them stayed in Russia and became known as the Russians, Ukrainians. Another big group moved east, and they went down and took over Armenia and Iran, over into India and Pakistan. So the people of northern India are the first cousins of the Europeans. The languages of northern India are related to the languages of the Western and Eastern Europeans. Well, when the Aryans invaded northern India, as you can see from the picture at the bottom, they conquered the indigenous people, and they ended up intermarrying with them, conquering them. They assumed the language of the Aryan conquerors, and they developed their own religion, which was basically Aryan religion, mixed with the religions of the Indus Valley peoples. Well, this merging of the ancient peoples of India, the Dravidian peoples, and the Aryans really spurred on the emergence of both empire and a whole new religion. In the 1st to the 6th centuries, Hinduism had emerged as a blend of the Aryan religion and the ancient religions of the Indus Valley. Gradually, it developed its own list of gods, its sacred language of Sanskrit, its sacred books of the Veda, developed its caste system, and all kinds of deities and rituals. Well, this new civilization was very successful. And from India, it spread into Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, down into Indonesia, Malaysia, even up into the Philippines, where this new, highly developed, sophisticated civilization took root. And in fact, if you go to Borobudur in Indonesia, you see the great temples, such as you see in the right in Indonesia, the glorious moment when Hinduism was the predominant religion of this whole Southeast Asian world, and it flourished. The sacred mountain of Hindus is Meru Peak, and that is considered the abode of the Hindu gods. And they also believe that when, for example, the king of Thailand dies, his soul goes to Mount Meru in India to join with his ancestors. A very striking mountain in northern India. And so Hinduism really took root and it began to grow and spread. Bali built its own civilization in Indonesia of Hindu temples. The gods of India were worshipped, the priests, the caste system. Sanskrit remained the sacred language of the Bali Empire. In fact, Bali is a very famous tourist area because it is still a Hindu area inside of Muslim Indonesia. Borobudur, another great Hindu temple complex in Indonesia. Here again, we see that these were great empires, high civilizations, high technology, architecture, music, artwork, once again recreating the mountains of in northern India. The temples are artificial mountains, like in northern India. So the Hindu civilization spread far and wide. Well, the one place where this new Hindu civilization really took root was in what is today modern-day Cambodia. They established the Khmer Empire in 802, which survived until 1431. It included what is today Cambodia, most of Thailand, large parts of Vietnam, and even influencing Burma and north into China and south into what is today Malaysia. And they built their giant, beautiful temple complex and capital cities of Angkor Wat. And as you can see from the picture on the right, like so many lost cities of the world, the people abandoned it for various reasons. Still quite a mystery. Global change, weather patterns, war, we really don't know. And the temples were overgrown because they were built in the middle of a jungle. Giant vines covered the temples, and even the people didn't even bother going there anymore because they had built new cities in areas where the agriculture was better. And so Angkor Wat remained a lost city, the lost capital of the great Khmer Empire. Well, at its largest extent, the Khmer Empire expanded and dominated almost all of Southeast Asia, on Burma, Thailand, huge areas of Vietnam, up into China, even an influence in Burma. And their capital of Angkor was the capital of their empire. Much as Moscow is the capital of the Russian Empire, Washington is the capital of the American Empire, Paris is the capital of the French Empire. And so a lot of money and effort were put into making the capital of the Khmer Empire a great and a marvelous city. King Jayavarman II, who ruled from 770 to 850, even declared himself the king of the world. And it's his face which decorates so many of the temples, saying that he was an emperor equal to that of China or India or the Middle East. He expanded his empire and made Cambodia great. He was followed by King Suryavarman I, who ruled from 1006 to 1050. He was a great leader, and he accepted the new religion emerging in India, the religion of Buddhism, which emerged from Hinduism under the leadership of the great teacher, the Buddha. He built his own new capital, which again is in ruins, as you can see. Again, completely covered with trees and vines, and another one of the lost cities of the Khmer Empire. Angkor Wat itself was built by Suryavarman II, who ruled from 1113 to 1150. He is portrayed, as you can see in the relief and the picture, he is portrayed as the founder of a new capital, Angkor Wat. Now, building a new capital city is not an easy undertaking. Think when George Washington decided to build a new capital. He couldn't be in Boston, didn't want New York or Philadelphia or Charleston. He decided to build a brand new capital city, which a lot of rulers do. When the Muslims conquered Egypt, they built Cairo. When the Jews conquered Palestine, they built a new capital, Tel Aviv. When the Brazilian government wanted to declare the power and the independence of Brazil from its European colonial history, it built Brasilia. Peter the Great built a brand new capital and named it after himself, St. Petersburg. So building a new capital is part and parcel of politics. The city itself in the year 1000 was claimed by many to be the largest city in the world. In the very middle of the picture, you see Angkor Thom, which is a temple complex, and below that, the most famous Angkor Wat, with the east and the west Baray, which were large pools of water. The area around Angkor Wat is very flat. It is jungle. And when it rains, you have to control the water. And so huge reservoirs were built for the water and used for agriculture during the dry season. So it was a very complex city. You can see going from Angkor Thom straight north is the Great Northern Highway. Going south, there's another highway, and the highways going east and west, with Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom at the very center of this giant grid. Now, the temples themselves are recreations of Mount Meru, and you can see the 5 mountains surrounded by the walls and palaces. And you can see it's all jungle, very flat all around. Mountains are very important in history. Where did Moses go to get the 10 Commandments? Mount Sinai. Jesus was crucified on Mount Golgotha. Mountains is where people go to get enlightenment. The Prophet Muhammad went into the mountains to begin receiving his revelations from God. So this is sacred architecture. North-south axis, east-west axis. This is Beijing. This is the a recreation of a sacred geometry and sacred mountains. This is the tourist map. You see Angkor Thom with the east and west parade and Angkor Wat below that. And it is completely surrounded by temples. Most tourists spend a couple of days there and they see only a tiny part of what they could have seen. It is a giant city. It'd be like visiting New York and only visiting Fifth Avenue. You're missing 90% of the city. But it is so vast, and it is, of course, forested in jungles. And so many of the temples have not even been restored yet. Angkor Wat has been restored. There are over 1,000 temples, some of them like this one, Angkor Wat, completely surrounded by a moat on an island. And again, you see it is jungle. If you didn't chop down the trees and maintain it, it would be overrun very quickly with vegetation. This is the Angkor Thom Gate, and it shows the face of the Hindu god Vishnu. Remember, this is a Hindu temple. It was built by Hindus for Hindus. And you see the crown on his head with the pointed archway. Gates are very important in architecture. Think of the Arc de Triomphe. Think of Washington Arch in New York City. Triumphal arches in Rome, Arch of Constantine. Here again, monumental archways transition from the outside world to the inside world. Beijing has probably more arches than any city in the world. There again, that's me, and you see the how weathered the stones are, because it is a rainy season. It rains, it pours, the stones get worn down, they get covered with lichens and moss, and trees grow out from between the stones, which can cause a lot of damage. So that's why restoration is so important, because left to its own, the trees growing between the rocks would absolutely destroy the temples. The arches, the artwork. You see one of the emperors, one of the kings on his elephant, and at his base you see the captives being taken back as slaves to Angkor Wat. The various deities are still carved into the stone. You see daily scenes, such as the one at the bottom on the right, of farmers with wagons and with elephants and doing the daily work of maintaining an empire. And so the artwork is absolutely phenomenal, and it is well preserved. This is an example of the power of the trees, where they just put roots between the rocks, go down into the underground, and literally sitting on top of a lot of these temples, eventually causing a lot of them to collapse. You see all the rocks at the base of that tree, which have been knocked loose from various temples and various surrounding buildings. But it is so vast, so many temples in need of restoration, that even UNESCO, which just declared it a World Heritage Site, they can't possibly get enough money to restore these temples. So I think with the trees growing out, it shows how a city can become lost, completely covered over with trees. Well, Angkor Wat is the national symbol. It is on stamps. It is on the currency. It is on medals given to famous people. And it is on the flag. So it is sort of the symbol of the Cambodia when it was a great empire and one of the great empires of the world. Well, with most lost cities, the question emerges. Why were they lost? Why did they decline? Why were they abandoned, like so many of the Maya cities in the Yucatan or Machu Picchu in Peru? Why were these cities lost? Well, if you look at the map, you see almost in the middle Thailand, which reasserted its independence. And Cambodia, you see what Cambodia is today, a mere shadow of what it was originally. Well, the Hindu Empire, at its high point from India down to Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, up into the Philippines, gradually declined because other empires started emerging. The Chinese started expanding down from China, taking over large areas of what is today Vietnam. Muslims started arriving by sea across the Indian Ocean, and today Indonesia and Malaysia are predominantly Muslim countries. They completely replaced the Hinduism of the empire. Eventually, the French colonialists started taking over Vietnam. The English took over India and Burma and Hong Kong. The Americans grabbed the Philippines, and later on, the Japanese would take Taiwan and start expanding southward. So with all of these major powers emerging and expanding, the Khmer Empire began to decline. Islam expanded very rapidly from its origin in Saudi Arabia, across North Africa, up into Central Asia, into India, and gradually Islamic traders ended up converting the majority of the people in Malaysia and Indonesia, southern Philippines. There are mosques in Cambodia because there was a very strong influence of the Muslim and traders and business people in Cambodia. Buddhism began to spread, and gradually Angkor Wat, while it remained covered with Hindu temples and Hindu sculptures, gradually Buddhist monks took over a few of the temples and remained there, turning them into monasteries. A picture on the left, you see a statue of the Buddha with the umbrella and incense, and on the right, you see a group of Buddhist monks going through to one of the temples. If you look closely at the temple, on the right, you see that water is laying, stones are scattered. The temple has not been restored. Once again, it would cost too much to restore all of these hundreds of temples. Well, gradually, the French took over Vietnam, they took over Cambodia, and they took over Laos. The British took over India and Burma. The Dutch eventually took over Indonesia. The English took over Malaysia, and the United States occupied the Philippines. So the only country that remained semi-independent in all of this was Thailand, but it was difficult for it to maintain its independence, and it had to make compromises. But Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia were taken over by the French as French colonies, and the rest of South Asia was grabbed by the Dutch, the British, the Americans. And so Cambodia was reduced to a shadow of itself. Eventually, Thailand emerged in the 1700s, and it destroyed the last of the independence of Cambodia, and the capital city was largely abandoned. The temples were left to ruin, and the Angkor Wat became one of the lost cities. And so the future of Cambodia did not look very great. The French, as you can see from their colonial map, French Indochina, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. And Thailand was semi-autonomous. Burma was English. Malaysia was English. And so Cambodia just became a province of the French Empire. Well, the same thing is going on today, where you have China expanding southward, taking over the Spratly Islands, taking over the huge area of the South China Sea. And so once again, now that the British and the Americans are gone and the French are gone, the South China is becoming a competition area between the rising Chinese empire and the American empire. On the right, you see all these red countries where you see American military bases. Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Cambodia is really squeezed between the two new superpowers, China and the United States. Well, Angkor Wat basically was lost, covered over with trees, largely forgotten. Cambodia was an impoverished country of farmers, occupied by the French, and of no major consequence. But Angkor Wat was rediscovered by Antonio de Madalena, who was a Portuguese Catholic priest. And he heard stories of this lost city in the jungle and said, well, maybe it's time to explore this legend. Well, there were loads of legends back in the 1500s. El Dorado, the city of gold somewhere in the Americas. Ancient city of Atlantis, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. Christopher Columbus was searching for it. Thought, I can discover it. It is a great city. The lost city of the Brazilian jungle in South America. The lost city of Z. Legends of the lost city of Great Zimbabwe, somewhere in the hills of southern Africa. Well, Father Madalena decided to explore this legend. And he discovered a city of such extraordinary construction that it is not possible to describe it with a pen, particularly since it is like no other building in the world. It has towers and decorations and all the refinements which the human genius can conceive of. And so, in 1589, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat was no longer a lost city. It had been rediscovered. Well, everybody was out exploring lost cities. Napoleon in the early 1800s had invaded Egypt, discovered the Rosetta Stone, and became one of the first of the great archaeologists. Alexander von Humboldt traveled all over the Americas and South America, discovering lost civilizations. Audubon discovering the world of plants and animals in strange countries. Charles Darwin exploring the peoples and the places of the world and came up with his theory of natural selection. So Angkor Wat was part of this great discovery of the world, that there was something beyond London, Paris, Madrid, and Rome, that there was a whole world out there. And most surprisingly, they had great ancient civilizations. The first person to seriously study Angkor Wat was Henry Muot in 1826, 1861. And in his book, Voyage dans le royaume de Siam, de Cambodge et de Laos, his voyages in the kingdom of Siam, or Thailand, plus Cambodia and Laos, published in 1868. Here again, he described it, made drawings. The camera was not yet able to capture the images, but he would write down legends, write down stories, get as much information as you can. One of the early archaeologists. And he wrote, one of these temples rivals that of the Temple of Solomon and some of the monuments and cathedrals built by Michelangelo. And he said they are as grand as the monuments of ancient Greece and Rome. You can see how the spelling there is Angkor. So there in Angkor, there are ruins of such grandeur that at first view one is filled with profound admiration. And then he asked the question, what has become of this powerful race, so civilized, so enlightened? Who were the authors of these gigantic works? Now, here again, realize he was traveling through the jungle. Most of the people were impoverished, dying of disease, living in huts and doing what they could in agriculture. And then to stumble upon these ancient monuments saying, who could have built these? What has become of this once powerful race? This is the mystery of lost cities. What happened to them? Why did they decline? Some people even argued that the ancient Cambodians would have been totally incapable of building these, and they must have been built by ancient Egyptians or Indians or Chinese. Some people, like von Däniken, said they were actually aliens who landed and helped them build these magnificent temples. But that's the mystery of lost cities and lost civilizations. These were some of the drawings he made of the temples. This was the age, again, before photography. So you can imagine how much time he would have to spend there to make these sketches of the temples. But they really caused quite a sensation back in France, saying that there was a great civilization and what happened to it. Don't forget, the rise and fall of civilizations has always intrigued people. What happened to the ancient civilization of Atlantis? The rise and fall of ancient Greece, of ancient Rome, the rise and fall of Egyptian civilizations, the rise and fall of Solomon's empire in Israel, Palestine. Why do empires decline? What is the mystery of these lost cities? Well, the Paris World's Fair of 1878 featured Siam and Thailand, as well as Cambodia, as one of the newly discovered great civilizations of the world. This was the Exposition Universelle, and it was really one of the great events of Paris. It was then when they inaugurated the Eiffel Tower, the ultra-modern steel structure, but at the same time, they celebrated the French World Empire. The head of the Statue of Liberty was displayed before it was shipped off to New York. Villages from Africa were recreated with people from Africa. Towns of various places in France and around the world were recreated. As the picture on the right shows, it was a universal exposition. Americans had a big display. Germany, Russia, all of the countries of the world were celebrating their greatness. The French recreated a temple from the Khmer Empire. As you can see on the left, it was made out of plaster of Paris. It was not meant to last. It was just there to celebrate the Cambodian presence in the French Empire. On the right, you see books which were made to celebrate the ruins of Angkor, and postcards and everything else were distributed and sold to, once again, celebrate the greatness of the French Empire. These are some more examples of artwork which were taken back to France, put in museums, reconstruction of temples and deities and monuments to show that there was a great empire there, that the city was no longer lost. And scholars, archaeologists wrote about it, gave lectures, and it was, again, celebration of the French world empire. But it also raised a serious question, because when the French were grabbing half of Africa and South Asia, the British were grabbing chunks of Africa and India, they justified their empire by saying that these people were primitive, that the people of Cambodia were impoverished, filled with disease. Africans were pagans, cannibals, and everything. And so to justify their empire, they had to say, we are bringing civilization to these people. But they do admit that one time the Khmers had civilizations, but they lost it. And Kipling wrote, "The white man's burden. It is the duty of white people to bring these savages out of their primitive existence into modern civilization." When the United States invaded the Philippines, it was the same thing, bringing American civilization to the savages. In French, it was called the Mission Civilisatrice de la France, the civilizing mission of France. They were once great, but they declined and became degenerate. And so now it is up to France and Britain, United States, to bring civilization again. Well, my trip to Thailand was in 2003, and I spent a wonderful vacation in Angkor Wat. So if you're planning a trip, the easiest way is to go to Thailand, which is a great place to visit, and then for 7 to 9 hours, you can take one of these big reclining seat buses, which zip you across the border into Cambodia. They usually have an arrangement with a hostel or a hotel, and you can have a nice couple-day vacation visiting it. And so there's me on the left at one of the temples in Thailand, and that's the kind of bus I took. So it's very easy to get around. My second visit was not to Cambodia, but to Thailand, and that was in January 2016. I was there for the funeral service of King Rama IX, who was the longest reigning king in the world. Now, of course, Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam today are Buddhist, but as Angkor Wat testifies, the roots of Buddhism are deep into Hinduism. The name of the king, King Rama IX, is named after the Hindu god Ram. And when the king died, they believed that his soul went back to Mount Meru, where he would live forever with the ancient Hindu gods. And so the presence of Angkor Wat as a Hindu temple is still very strong in Cambodia, in Thailand, and in Vietnam. Now, when I travel, I stay in hostels. That's me again. And on the right, it shows the hostel where I was staying. Bunk beds, 4, 6 to a room, and you meet the most interesting people. You meet travelers from the area, you meet travelers from all over the world, and you can see there's a roof deck where you can sit out in the sun and it's secure. That was one of the very nice hostels where I would stay. The only problem I have is I don't climb those ladders up into the second level anymore. I always request a bottom bunk. So that's something to keep in mind. So the enduring power of Hinduism in South Asia is not just Angkor Wat in the temples, but it is the role of God Rama as inspiring kings and leaders. In Hinduism, nirvana is the ultimate goal of Hinduism and Buddhism. Buddhism does not believe in heaven or hell. When you're dead, you're dead. Although Hinduism does believe in reincarnation until you achieve perfection. The caste system is still very much present in South Asia, where people know who's your superior and who's your inferior. These are shots from the funeral of King Rama IX, showing the ship, wooden ship, which is, when he dies, will carry him to Mount Meru. There you see pictures of the king with Hindu gods and goddesses surrounding him. So Angkor Wat is one of those lost cities of the world that testifies to a golden age of the Khmer Empire, when Hinduism reigns supreme through South Asia, a golden age of architecture, of music, of literature, of government. So every lost city, once it's rediscovered, really fascinates people. And me, I'm always going off somewhere, exploring some lost place. I can never travel and not do research. So I'm visiting temples and palaces and wonderful places all around the world. So Angkor Wat, along with Machu Picchu, along with Great Zimbabwe, along with other lost cities of the world, continue to fascinate people. So thank you very much for joining me for this talk, and I hope to see you in the near future for another exciting talk. If you'd like to contact me, it's ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. Feel free to contact me. So this is Dr. Ronald Brown logging off, and I hope to see you sometime in the future.